Welcome. I'm Doug Morgan, and you're listening to Uncommon Sense, where we hunt for the truth in the topics you're not supposed to talk about, Christianity and politics. Today's topic is a little personal for me. As some of you know, I was married for 28 years and have 4 adult children from that marriage. This marriage was a dysfunctional marriage that had many problems. But one thing that we agreed on was that we would not divorce until the kids were grown and out of the house. We agreed on this to minimize the effect on the children. But even though we sacrificed by staying together all those years, some of the children are currently estranged from me. And what I'm finding is that this is not an unusual occurrence, that our feelings-based society has had a big effect on the family. Gates Garcia writes this. He says, "My parents still live in my childhood home, and I live 1 street away. It is common for my dad to stop me on jogs for a quick catch-up. My wife and I often joke that we can't escape my parents' presence, but we don't want to. At 40, I can't imagine a life where my father isn't present. That didn't happen by accident. Unfortunately, I am becoming part of a shrinking group," he says. A 2022 study reveals that by adulthood, 28% of daughters and 24% of sons are estranged from their fathers, while only 6% are estranged from their mothers. With so much talk surrounding a myriad of childhood crises these days, I propose we have a fatherhood crisis. When I was growing up, my dad was hard on me. I was pushed to play sports and always required to have a summer job. But when I'd come home from practice or bussing tables, he was always there. My dad constantly told me he loved me, almost to my exhaustion, as I was encouraged to repeat it back. He was teaching me both to be loved and how to love. Even when I went far from home to play college football, my dad attended every game. Presence was a priority. He taught me that closeness was normal. I have no memories of my dad not being there, and thus I couldn't envision any other way of life. My dad didn't just provide, he stayed. So why are so many men losing their adult children? We can start with divorce. Nearly 1/3 of American children experience divorce before adulthood. Fathers are far more likely to become the non-resident parent post-divorce. Less time equals weaker bonds. But while divorce affects the quantity of dad's time with his children, it does not explain resignation. Even married fathers can be emotionally absent. This is when the culture takes over instead. I know from the countless times I hear, "Daddy, watch me," that kids want to be seen. And when they aren't seen by their parents, they resort to social media and gaming, where their presence is validated and celebrated. One multi-year study found that as gaming increases, the perceived quality of family relationships tend to deteriorate, especially when parental bonds are weaker. And if dad doesn't see his kids, well, the algorithm will. The good news is the same studies indicate that stronger parental attachment, emotional closeness, and social support is linked to lower levels of gaming addiction in adolescence, suggesting that weaker attachment may be associated with more compulsive engagement with games. If you're a dad, ask yourself, how many times a day do you tell your kids you love them? Are you leading them toward you or pushing them away? In a society that is constantly turning its back on institutions, perhaps one of the oldest institutions, the church, may help families the most here. The Bible tells us in Malachi 4:6, "He will turn the hearts of the fathers to their children, and the hearts of their children to their fathers." Studies look at fathers specifically find that factors such as church attendance and broad religious participation are positively related to paternal engagement with children, meaning men who are more involved in religious communities also tend to be more engaged with their kids. The church provides families with shared rituals and a shared moral language. Families that pray together stay together, in other words. Well, while a lot of quality time is important for fathers to prioritize with their sons, ultimately boys go to college and eventually graduate into manhood. They will have to think and act for themselves. My dad, he says, prepared me for this in a way I'm trying to emulate for my 4 kids. My dad was always there. Presence, not not perfection, was the standard. Time, not money, was our family's currency. I literally can't think of a childhood memory that doesn't have my dad in it. My dad vocalized his expectations often and held incredibly high standards for me. Anytime I'd say I couldn't do something, his response was always, why not? Win district tournaments in wrestling in just my first year? Why not? Get a job at a top financial firm with no experience? Why not? Become president one day? Why not? Pressure isolates, but expectations build identity. And a lifetime sitting at the feet of my father has been one defined by expectations. Finally, and maybe most importantly, we shared our future with one another. That future involved both of us. We talk about our lives ahead and include both of us in the story. And I remember conversations about future milestones in my own fatherhood and how my dad couldn't wait to be a grandpa. As a child, I couldn't envision adulthood without my dad. If nearly a quarter of adult sons cut their dads off, something foundational is breaking. And it's the job of a dad to build a solid foundation. The best thing you can give your kids is a reason to stay. Share meals together, go to church together, talk about life in the future. Tell your kids you love them and expect great things for and from them. Hug them and kiss them and live your life with your kids, not just for them. Build independence in them without emotional distance. Teach them how to love by loving them first. We don't have a boy crisis, he says. We have a dad problem, and it's fixable. I live one street from my dad because he never gave me a reason to leave, he says. And I thought that was good. Again, you know, I would say that it's not all on dads, but that oftentimes dads can create a real issue. He also says that as a girl dad, he says, I was horrified by a recent story about 2 girls in Florida who were groomed online by a man they met through the gaming platform Roblox. He lured the girls into trusting him and then abducted them. Thankfully, law enforcement intervened before the worst happened, but the relief of a rescue should not blunt the warning embedded in this story. He says it may be fair to direct our outrage at the platform, lacks moderation, or the internet itself, but focusing only on the digital predator misses a deeper and more uncomfortable truth. Children who are guided at home are far harder to groom. This isn't to say the family in this case was negligent or uncaring, but if you're a parent, the biggest thing you can do to protect your children online is not to buy the new parental control software or limit their screen time. The best way to help your kids is to let them know that you're present, you're listening, and you're there to provide guidance. Our culture has lowered expectations for fathers, especially when it comes to vigilance and authority and involvement. And when fathers retreat from those roles, children are left exposed, not just online, but everywhere. Predators start with attention. They look for children who are bored, lonely, unsure, unsupervised, or unseen. They exploit curiosity and emotional gaps long before they exploit technology. Online platforms don't create those vulnerabilities, they reveal them. And for decades now, we've told men explicitly and implicitly that fatherhood is unessential. Nowhere is that message reinforced more consistently than on television. The modern TV father is rarely a figure of authority or competence. He's the lovable idiot or the well meaning buffoon. In Modern Family, one of the most popular sitcoms of the past 2 decades, patriarch Phil Dunphy is charming, enthusiastic, and affectionate, but he's also chronically unserious. When real decisions need to be made, he's not the one calling the shots. Look at Homer Simpson, perhaps the most influential fictional dad in American pop culture. For generations, he's been the butt of the Simpsons jokes. Sitcoms and movies treat fathers as nothing but punchlines. When our culture tells us fatherhood is unnecessary, we shouldn't be surprised when real men absorb the message. You don't have to be absent to be disengaged. You just have to believe that your presence doesn't really matter. An engaged father changes everything. I know what my kids are playing and watching because we talk about it. We discuss what brings them joy and what bothers them. Rather than judging their decisions, I start conversations about them. I am their content filter. Predators rely on secrecy, isolation, and emotional manipulation to operate. When kids are seen, protected, and navigating life with their fathers, it rips the pages from that playbook. And when regular conversation and open communication between a parent and a child, especially a father, is the norm, it becomes easier for kids to realize and recognize evil. And when it's revealed, the I didn't know who to tell moment never arrives because someone has already been listening. This is where modern parenting often goes wrong. We've outsourced too much responsibility to screens and software. We trust parental controls more than parental presence. We assume that because a platform markets itself as safe, our role has diminished. It hasn't. It has intensified. Fatherhood now requires engagement in spaces our fathers never had to patrol. That can feel unfamiliar, but discomfort is not an excuse for uh, abdication. A dad doesn't need to be a gamer to ask questions. He doesn't need to understand every app to establish rules. He doesn't need technical mastery to exercise authority. He needs willingness, a willingness to say no, to exert authority, and to ask questions. One of those questions should be, who are you talking to? Too many fathers, too many fathers fear this type of confrontation with their kids, but failing to engage opens up avenues of exploitation that far outweigh the consequences of an uncomfortable conversation. Children seek connection. If they aren't finding it at home, they will find it elsewhere. The internet is not just a playground. It's a marketplace of attention, and predators know how to sell. Strong fatherhood fills that void before it opens. Children are not equipped to navigate adult dangers alone, especially in a digital world designed to blur age, identity, and intent. We should absolutely demand accountability from tech companies. We should support law enforcement. We should aggressively prosecute predators. But we should also confront the cultural lie that says fathers are spectators in their children's lives. When fathers step up, visibly, confidently, and consistently, kids are safer. Not perfectly safe, but safer. The story of these girls should make us not only angry, but also serious about supervision and involvement and reclaiming the role of fathers as protectors. The internet didn't create this danger. It simply exposed what happens when we pretend that presence doesn't matter. It does. And a father's presence matters more than he can ever know. And I would agree with that. I myself, I took career paths that didn't necessarily make the most money in the whole world. I could made a whole lot more money doing some other things. I turned down offers to make more money just simply because it didn't give me the time with my family that I wanted. It basically, I needed that flexibility of schedule to know, in order to be at their games and to be at their concerts and to be with them and the family. But those sacrifices I was willing to make. Now, they didn't all pay off, but that was the decision I made. And Joshua Coleman, he writes this. He says, a recent Cornell study found that 27% of adults are estranged from a family member. Research from Ohio State finds that 26% of fathers are estranged from their adult children, and that fathers are 22% more likely to be estranged from a daughter than a son. Behind each of these numbers is a story of loss, love, confusion, and hope. Family estrangement is rarely a sudden rapture. More often, it unfolds slowly, a series of misunderstandings, hurt feelings, mismatched expectations, or unresolved conflicts that accumulate over months, if not years. Parents and adult children are navigating these decisions in a world where the vocabulary of psychology and therapy has become deeply woven into public life. Terms like boundaries and trauma and toxicity and emotional safety have entered everyday conversation, giving people new ways to name their distress, but also new frameworks for interpreting family relationships through the lens of harm. While this evolution has helped some break free from genuinely destructive dynamics, it has also made family life more fragile, as ordinary imperfections or intergenerational differences can be experienced as evidence of deeper wounds. Understanding how these cultural forces interact with personal histories is essential to making sense of why so many families today find themselves struggling to stay connected. As a psychologist says, who researches engagement and works with estranged families, my practice has become flooded with parents and adult children desperate to figure out how to navigate their relationships. I've learned that reconciliation is difficult, not because families are uniquely broken, but because both generations are operating with profoundly different assumptions about what love, repair, and responsibility require. Over the past half century, family life has undergone dramatic shifts, reshaping how we think about the bonds between parents and their adult children. Today's cultural focus on self-actualization and emotional health has recast decisions about maintaining or severing relationships not merely as personal choices, but as acts of psychological self-preservation. Within this framework, cutting ties with a parent or an adult child may be seen as a legitimate or even courageous step toward safeguarding one's mental health and pursuing personal growth, asserting a gender identity or a sexual orientation, clarifying a political stance, or simply seeking happiness and independence. While family tensions and the wish to distance oneself are nothing new, framing the estrangement as a necessary part of self-development reflects a distinctly modern mindset. For most of history, family relationships were based on mutual obligations rather than on mutual understanding. The historian Stephanie Kuhns once said that parents or children might reapproach one another for failing to honor a duty, but the idea that a relative could be faulted for failing to affirm one's identity would have been incomprehensible. Estranged parents and adult children often come to the table with vastly different assumptions about what healing or reconciliation requires. Some of the greatest challenges stem from the changing definitions of what constitutes harm, abuse, trauma, or neglect. When the goal of parenting was primarily to raise a functional, independent adult, the standards for success were relatively clear. But as that goal expanded to include raising a happy, emotionally attuned, and socially fluent individual, the range of potential parental shortcomings has widened accordingly. Behaviors once considered normal or even well intentioned are now seen as damaging or formative in ways that demand redress. The bad news is that many otherwise loving and functional parents are being cut off based on therapeutic narratives that many overstate harm and equate estrangement with healing or empowerment. While some parents cut off their children due to incompatible beliefs around religion, sexuality, gender identity, mental illness, and addictions, studies find that the vast majority of estrangements are, well, initiated by the adult child. So why is it so hard? Well, these cultural shifts shape not only why families become estranged, but also why coming back together is so profoundly challenging. Many parents feel they did the best they could, sometimes under difficult circumstances. Others believe their parenting was good overall, even if imperfect. Some fear that acknowledging past mistakes will be used against them or will only deepen their shame and sense of loss. While these concerns are understandable, taking responsibility is almost always a necessary, if not sufficient, step toward reconciliation. Sadly, not every parent can offer that. The same qualities that may have complicated parenting, unresolved trauma, difficulty with emotional, regulation, rigid views on authority, can also interfere with attempts at reconciliation. A parent who never addresses their own childhood wounds may shut down and lash out when an adult child tries to talk about painful memories. You think you had it bad? I would have killed for that childhood, the childhood that you had, is not uncommon, though not typically helpful in response. Others may experience the request for accountability as a reversal of the natural order. Why should they, the parent, now be answerable to the child? And for some, especially in cultures that emphasize parental authority and filial obligation, the very idea of apologizing to an adult child feels not only uncomfortable, but offensive. And yet, reconciliation doesn't fail only because of a parent's limitations. Some adult children reject sincere attempts at repair, not because the parent is unwilling to change, but because of their own struggles with addiction, mental illness, or the influence of a romantic partner who discourages any connection with the family of origin. In other cases, poorly trained therapists may inadvertently make things worse, encouraging cutoff without exploring other options, misdiagnosing parents, or framing estrangement as a sign of autonomy rather than a possible form of conflict avoidance. So while he says, I don't recommend that a parent directly ask their adult child to, for forgiveness, they can create the conditions for it through actions that help the child feel genuinely cared for and understood. One of the most effective ways to do this is with a sincere letter of amends. At its core, a strong letter acknowledges past mistakes, large and small, and expresses genuine empathy for the child's experience and its impact on their development. It avoids common pitfalls like defensiveness, blame shifting, or self loathing. Instead, it communicates a willingness to listen, to grow, and to take the child's pain seriously, even when the parent doesn't fully agree with the details or characterizations. Um, Amends letters matter, not just because they say, I'm sorry, but because they convey the psychological capacities that contemporary relationships demand: self reflection, humility, and openness to change. They are often the clearest signal that the parent is invested not only in reconciliation, but in becoming the kind of person their adult child can relate to now, not just the parent they remember. And that said, writing an amends letter doesn't guarantee reconciliation. Some adult children, no matter how sincere the gesture, won't respond. Others may require time or remain unsure whether a relationship can be repaired. But the act of writing the letter can still serve as a meaningful psychological milestone for the parent and potentially for the child. Forgiveness and reconciliation also require reflection and, in many cases, work on the part of the adult child, if that's their goal. For those who have experienced genuine harm, neglect, rejection, abuse, this can be especially difficult. Forgiveness is not forgetting, excusing, or minimizing what happened. Rather, it's a gradual and often non-linear process that may include grieving the parent they wished they had, accepting the limitations of the parent they do have, and making meaning out of early experiences that may have once felt senseless or overwhelming. For some, forgiveness may feel impossible, at least for a time. The wounds are still fresh, the harm never acknowledged, or the safety of the relationship still in question. In those cases, maintaining distance may be a necessity and self-protection act. And even for those who do want reconciliation, the fear of being hurt again or having their pain minimized can make forgiveness feel like too much to ask. Some may not trust their own ability to set limits or hurtful behavior while remaining in contact, or they don't feel sufficiently distanced from the parent's influence to know they can hold on to their feelings of self-esteem if the parent behaves in ways they find hurtful. In other words, the parent's voice is still too powerful an influence. Research has found that while early caregiving matters, so do many other forces: genetics, temperament, peer relationships, siblings, class, cohorts, historical context, and simple bad luck. Now, every struggle with boundaries, mental illness, and attachment or trust is the direct result of parenting. For adult children who are open to it, expanding this view can be liberating. It doesn't erase what happened, but it often softens the grip of the past. It may allow them to see their parents not only through the lens of harm, but also through the lens of limitation, infallibility, or even shared humanity. It may also shift the focus from needing a parent to change in order to feel whole to developing an identity that no longer depends on parental validation or alignment. As one newly reconciled adult child told me, he says, if you keep insisting that your parent has to change in order to have a relationship with you, maybe you're the one that should change. Estrangement is rarely a simple story of villains and victims. Repair, when it's possible, asks something of everyone involved. Forgiveness, whether it leads to reconciliation or simply to a gentler inner stance, remains one of the most powerful tools we have for loosening the grip of grievance and restoring a sense of agency, compassion, and emotional freedom. And I will say that it's always good to keep the door open to estranged children. I have, in my case, doors always open there. I make periodic contact with them, the ones that are estranged. Not all of them are. Our current feelings-based culture, though, only makes it harder to reconcile, in my opinion. And sometimes you just have to understand that everyone has a free will, and they will choose what they choose. Would love to hear your feelings on it. Maybe you have gone through this. Maybe you're estranged from a parent yourself or a child. Of course, you can always do that at uncommonsensepodcast.com. Thank you very much for listening. This podcast is a production of Morganite Communications.